Welcome to this episode of Founders on Finance, where we interview founders building interesting companies and learn about how they view finance, from raising rounds to managing cash. Today we have Jonah Hanig of Rove Travel. I've known Jonah for over a year now, and I'm excited to learn about how his finance background is influencing his founder journey in Rove. Hey, Jonah, thanks for carving out some time today. Why don't you give everybody a brief intro about who you are and what you're currently working on at Rove?
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. Really appreciate you having me on today. Yeah, my name's Jonah. My background, went to Columbia University undergrad, studied economics, started my career in finance, went through Y Combinator with a company in the software space, Explo, and then am now building Rove, which is a platform for turnkey remote work property rentals.
Got it. Great. Thanks for that. Why don't you, well, let's start with like a little bit more going into that of how you made your way to tech. You know, both of our backgrounds are somewhat similar. We both started off on Wall Street as investors, right? And then over some time there, you made the flip into the tech world. Can you walk us through a little bit more detail how you kind of made that transition? Because that's kind of interesting thing for many people to understand, how people from finance like myself and you kind of make that jump, because a lot of people, you know, start in tech and just stay in tech.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in the Chicago area, and a lot of the people that I knew, role models that I had, were in consulting and finance. And so I think that was an influence in me deciding to study economics at Columbia and pursue, finance out of college, especially with Columbia being in New York, so close to Wall Street, and being in the economics department. So many of my peers were going into investment banking. That's the route that I went. I co-founded an actively managed student hedge fund on campus because I was really excited about learning and investing and actually taking a more hands-on active approach and having some skin in the game compared to just having a pretend managed portfolio. And so that was really influential in my experience undergrad, wanting to go into investing. So I went to work for the private equity arm of Macquarie Capital out of college, which was the merchant banking and private capital group. I was on some cool transactions there. I was on a $100 million leverage buyout of a government services company, some growth equity investing, and other transactions. But when I was there, seeing my friends in tech and just having some role models that had started companies, I realized that I wanted to leave the finance world and start a company, really. And so that's what I did. I approached a few of my good friends who were in tech from Columbia, and we got into Y Combinator. Started actually in the restaurant space, completely different idea from what we pivoted to, and ended up pivoting into the data space.
Interesting. And you were part of Winter 20 batch, correct? Is that, I remember correctly?
Yeah, it was part of the Winter 20 batch with Explo.
Right, exactly. Okay, got it. Perfect. So obviously everybody always likes to know like the inner workings of Y Combinator. You went through it. So can you just give us maybe like a glimpse into what it was like for you and the Explo team? Obviously there's probably some late nights, you made some amazing connections. Kind of just walk us through maybe a little glimpse of what it was like for you guys as you were going through it.
Yeah, so I had a unique experience because we pivoted during the batch and then still did demo day and raised a seed round, very fortunately. And we were also the COVID batch. So we were the last in-person batch. So definitely a lot of interesting stories there. What I'll say is that we realized that our founder market fit and conviction around the original idea wasn't super strong. And so I think, that founder market fit is really important for really anyone starting a company. Why are you the best person to do this, and why is this a company you want to build? And so when we as a team realized that the team was better equipped to do other things, we made the decision to transition into a different space. And so we moved into the data space, originally building a tool for data exploration without SQL. So a point and click interface to join tables and to do data manipulation and such. And so, that was a good experience. And I learned a lot about raising like seed round pre-revenue, for example, and also just fundraising during the pandemic was crazy. But, Y Combinator was really pivotal to that journey and having the confidence in making such a big transition as a company. And we were a 4-person founding team. It was quite the journey.
Yeah. I mean, that, what you're saying pretty much resounds with everybody else that we talked to, which is pretty pretty standard issue, right? So I guess it's basically fair to say that, you know, from your side of the table, right? Like if you're going to go through the journey of starting a company and you have the idea to go into or apply to YC, you know, your recommendation is probably like, hey, go for it, best you can, submit the applications, do all the due diligence that you can about it, and just go for it. Is that probably pretty accurate?
Yeah, that's very accurate. I really recommend any first-time founder to do Y Combinator. The network is pretty unparalleled. The guidance is amazing, and just having peers that are experiencing the same problems that you are is extraordinarily helpful.
Right, right. I don't want to say it's like a fraternity or sorority of sorts, but it's similar to that, right? Like you're all very connected on a level from the day you go through that program till probably the future moving forward in the years to come.
Yeah, absolutely.
100%. Right. So obviously, ultimately you decided to move on from Explo and do your own thing. This was also during the COVID time, right? So leaving a fairly new company that's already, you know, raised some funding, and for you to personally pull that ripcord and go do your own thing, some people would, you know, scratch their head and say, why would you go do that? Can you kind of walk us through what drove you to make that change, you know, from leaving Explo to considering to do your own thing here and building Rove?
Sure. So, you know, Explo started as an idea I had in the restaurant space, and you know, as I discussed, we pivoted into the data space. You know, from a founder market fit perspective, the team was really strong in just, you know, as a product team and in data, but that was not my strong suit. And the challenges we were facing as a company, being, you know, basically pre-revenue and pre-product market fit, were really about product development. And coming from a finance background, and you know, my strong suit, I think, really being more on like the sales and partnership side, I wanted to be part of a company that was scaling and running into different problems and solving different issues than what we were facing in Explo. So that's what ultimately it drove me to leave. And so, you know, my experience at Explo, though, was the influence for my next company, Rove. And so what happened was we were traveling, group of founders, us and a few other Y Combinator founders in Southern California and a few other places, staying at different Airbnbs. We left San Francisco when COVID got bad, and there wasn't really a reason for us to be there working remotely for the first time. And we were just consistently running into terrible remote work setups at all the Airbnbs we were at. So we stayed in San Diego and had an amazing time being half a mile from the beach, but we would fight over, you know, who would take the room for the Zoom call, and Wi-Fi never worked. We would ship desks and monitors and even chairs to to make the workspaces usable. And so that was really the inspiration for the next company.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. So I guess kind of like maybe just jumping here on a little bit of a tangent, right? So like Rove, you're kind of setting up like one stops as soon as people show up, it's boom, it's all there for them. And that's kind of the idea of what's going on.
Yeah, the idea with Rove is there's a lot of companies that do a great job offering a consistent hospitality experience or corporate travel experience, like a hotel, like more like an apartment than a hotel, but with the type of consistency and quality you might expect from a hotel. But even most of these places and Airbnbs generally are not equipped for individuals and team to work out of. So the rooms and spaces are not optimized for, like, you know, I don't know if you've ever been doing an Airbnb, for example, that had a standing desk, monitor, and Herman Miller chair in every room. And that's what I'm trying to deliver, so you could comfortably work and live out of these spaces.
Right. Yeah, that absolutely makes sense because, I mean, let's be honest. We've all been to some Airbnbs, and I've personally tried to work out of them, you know, over my career. When you show up and you basically just have an apartment, it's very nice. But at the same time, if you're grinding it out on the coffee table with a laptop, it's not that exciting to be trying to take a presentation call or anything like that. So totally understand that. You know, and let's talk about this part, like, right, you're starting a travel business during COVID. That takes some severe grit, which is probably a nice way to say, like, you know, you're almost bonkers, right? Because during that time, public markets, anything that was dealing with hospitality or airlines or cruises, basically were in free fall, right? And people were basically scared, right? So I'm thinking on my side, everybody's heard the theory that amazing companies can start during crazy economic times or when things are going wild in the world. You know, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think you saw that as an opportunity, whereas people were running away from the fire per se, to where you're like, okay, I've got an interesting idea here that's going to kind of fill a gap or maybe plant the seed to grow as things in the world turn around?
Yeah, so I'm really bullish on travel, and I just think that the Airbnb, it's easy to see how big the wave of Airbnb is. Wanting, having experienced it myself, wanting to stay in private properties and not necessarily hotels that offer more privacy and freedom, was a trend that I didn't see going away, and so I was excited about being a part of that, and travel certainly took a huge hit and has been a huge the damage that it did to even some companies that went bankrupt has been has been a big consideration for me as I think about my business model with my next business. But all that being said, I'm super bullish in travel being bigger than ever after COVID.
Right, right. So as they say, the phoenix rises from the ashes, if you will.
Sure. Yeah.
Right, exactly. Well, let's take a step back to your investing days. You're starting on the new company here with Rove. Do you feel any of those skills and lessons that you had from your finance background are going to play into how you're building Rove? Any specific things that kind of jog from your memory where I learned this in the finance world, or I've used these skills that are kind of directly transferable to what you're building now?
Sure. I think that, with building a company, storytelling and having a narrative that's very concise is really important. And so I think from finance and really investing, hearing other entrepreneurs' stories and looking at, evaluating companies was very pivotal in helping me to understand how to tell a narrative and develop, my thesis for my company. I think with, Explo, my last company, I learned a tremendous amount. There's so much that is so different with me in being a founder and starting a company versus investing, and so I really learned just how to move quickly and I perhaps aim big.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I guess at the same time, right, since you've kind of straddled both lines, founder and investor per se, does your history frame things a little differently when you're kind of considering raising funding, or have seen people raise funding? Does that kind of frame out your mind a little bit differently? Because I'm sure at some point, that's what everybody does, right? So do you have like a viewpoint on how that works? If there's any specific examples that you've seen in the past that are very beneficial for people, kind of, maybe give some other founders ways to think about it from the investor side of the table.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely there's a few different questions in there. I definitely with this business, I raised initial round of funding pretty quickly. I think that if you have conviction on the idea and that you want to start a company, I think that raising, a lot of people want to bootstrap for a long time. I personally think that taking in some funding can be very beneficial because it can really help you move things off the ground and have fully commit yourself to starting a business. If you can raise funding, I mean, I'm happy to talk about the early stage funding process. I mean, I was not involved in early stage investing, and late stage investing is just completely different and very, there's not a lot of overlap to early stage between early stage investing and late stage investing, I think. So I wouldn't say there were a lot of directly transferable learnings there. But I definitely going out to fundraise sooner than later and ahead of traction is something that I think, at least for this company, is going to be beneficial.
Right. Yeah, I think that kind of goes back to what you were saying earlier about when you're looking at it as an investor, it's all about the story and presenting a good story to people out there. I'm sure, like you and me and everybody else out there, we see that the VC funding world is pretty flush with cash right now. A lot of dollars are sloshing around. Do you kind of expect that to continue moving forward, where money is going to be very plentiful, where, if you see things are working, especially for Rove, right? Things are working out pretty well, you're going to be pretty confident. My assumption would be that you're going to be able to go out there, tell a very good story, and find the funding that you need to put the fuel to the fire. Do you think that's going to continue on, or is it going to be something where maybe there's going to be a little bit of a correction in the VC world?
From a macro perspective, I think that we will continue to see, the hot rounds and the high valuations that we've seen. I mean, I think largely, it's translated I think the hot public markets and the high valuations that we're seeing in the public markets are really starting to impact private market valuations all the way down to the seed round. And especially when you see companies like Coinbase and Airbnb going public for over, $100 billion, I think it creates, even more FOMO at the seed and pre-seed stages. From a company perspective, I cautiously want to, raise capital, maybe somewhat ahead of traction, but, I am very conscious that, every dollar you raise and every, the more you increase your valuation, the less exit opportunities you have, and the more, the less ownership in the company and control you have. So, I think it's a balancing act, like everything else in building a company.
Right. The proverbial juggling act, as they say. And this is kind of like a little tangent here. You brought up the Coinbase thing. What's your take there? I know the company's only been trading publicly for a little over a week now. I personally noticed that it's primarily just tracking the actual outright Bitcoin price. Do you have any views on Coinbase or the cryptocurrency market or anything like that, or it's something you don't even pay attention to?
Yeah, I pay some attention to it. I some crypto investments. I long term am generally bullish on crypto. I think it will continue to be an asset class, especially as more mainstream markets adopt it. You see JP Morgan, creating cryptocurrency, access to cryptocurrency for clients, and there'll be more ETFs and ways to buy and access cryptocurrencies. And I mean, Coinbase, phenomenal company. Their last quarter was tremendous. So I don't see a reason for them to. I don't expect them to slow down anytime soon.
Sure, totally makes sense. Well, we're coming up towards the 20-minute mark. We like to kind of keep it around that area. Why don't you go ahead and give everybody listening and viewing this, how they can connect with you, Rove Travel website, your email, socials, anything like that, so people can go and find you personally and what you're building at Rove.
Sure. Yeah. The website's rovetravel.co. My email is jonah@rovetravel.co. Feel free to email me or maybe DM me on Twitter. I think my Twitter handle is Hanig Jonah.
Perfect. Well, I've had a great time chatting with you today. It's always good to connect. I haven't talked to you in a little bit there. For everybody out there watching this, listening to it, if you're starting to think about initiating team offsites, working remotely, or even just becoming a full-on digital nomad, strongly recommend checking out what Jonah's working on there over at Rove Travel. The replay of this conversation is going to be available on the Interprime YouTube channel. I'm also going to break down the track listings for you for specific questions for Jonah and his answers. All the links he has given us to his contact in rovetravel.co will be there if you missed them. And thanks again for listening. Jonah, it's great to connect with you. Enjoyed linking up again and learning about what you're building. And at some point, I'll have you back on once you get to keep rolling with Rove.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, great seeing you, man. I'll talk to you soon. Bye, Jonah.